Do I really mean it? Do I really, really mean it? Yes, I do. I really, really mean it. I want to be live with my friend Pete. Hello, welcome to the Squadron. And if you're here for our event with unusually a guest with even more unusually an amazing solution to a complicated problem, then you're in the right place. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Squirrel. I run the Squirrel Squadron, which is a community of 3,000 tech and non-tech executives, all learning together about making tech insanely profitable. And Pete is a community member introduced not so long ago. Pete, I think, a mutual friend said, hey, you ought to talk to this guy, Squirrel. And I said, Pete, you got to be in the community. We've got to hear more about the interesting stuff that you're doing. And Pete's going to tell us all about understanding whether your engineers, who you pay lots of money, you might have noticed, are actually earning you anything with the money that you're paying them. And that's been a question people have been trying to answer since my father's day. My father ran in a manufacturing company, in an extraction industry. He ran a number of different product organizations that built software on the great big machines that filled a room, the mainframes. And he was trying to figure out, is this guy in the corner actually doing anything? Is that person doing data entry? Are they actually the key person in the organization? Pete is working toward getting an answer to that question. So that sounds fascinating to me. I just want to mention a couple other things. Laura, do you have our nifty little scrolling thing that tells us that what I want to let you know is that we've got lots of events coming up, just like this one. These are all free events. Everything in the Squadron is free because it's my way of giving back. And so we have interesting topics coming up, including next week we're talking about what if you put everything on AI? What if you just got rid of people, changed your whole process? What if everything was bots? What would happen? And I have some clients who are trying that, so it's really interesting. We're also going to talk about how much people actually work, which is not very much, a 20-hour week. We just had amazing discussions. My favorite one that we've been doing recently is figuring out where bad guys get into your software. We have this big problem in the UK where shop stores shop shelves are empty. So you go into the shop and you're trying to buy stuff and there's nothing there. And it's because there was a huge ransomware attack. So how did those folks get in? What could you do about it? These are the kinds of things we talk about in a non-technical way. So, we're not going to dive in and ask you to do binary and know a bit from a byte, but we are going to say, look, here's how you can use technology in a much more successful way. Now, those of you who are out there, many of you have sent questions ahead, and Pete and I will definitely take as many of those as we can. Some of you are in distant lands and you're sleeping now, so you're going to watch this on the recording. That's great. But for those of you who are here with us, and I can see there's a number of you, please comment in the chat. I can see that. We can pass along questions. I love it when you disagree. I think Pete would find that really interesting. You'll find out from him what stage he's at. He's at the stage where he wants lots of feedback. So if you think Pete's solution is the dumbest thing ever, please tell us. We may not agree or we may agree, but it would be really helpful. We'd also appreciate it if you have questions and you say, how can I measure this? How can I use it with my team and so on? And I bet Pete would like to tell us a lot about how he's learning from his own customers in that way. And I think that's another really good model. How much feedback can you get in the early stage of building a piece of software? A lot more than you think is the answer. Okay, fantastic. So I think that's all the setup we need to do. So Pete, why don't you tell us just a little bit about you? What brought you to this problem? What sorts of things do you do? Can you just tell us a little bit about the history of Pete and how you got to this interesting puzzle?
Yeah, absolutely. My background's an accountant. I did a very traditional accounting route. And then I've spent the last 8 years leading the finance functions and data functions in a variety of software businesses. And actually, I share something somewhat in common with your father in that one of those businesses was a manufacturing business. We were building software that automates a CNC machine. Incredible business, really, really fascinating. And really, probably that's where the inception of this idea came from, because it was incredibly hard in that environment to understand, how the flow, if you like, of engineering activity ends up in business outcomes. But you also have this quite visual analogy that's in some ways analogous, I think, which is a manufacturing production environment, but is also very different in many ways to kind of software engineering and that flow of output. So I spent a bit of time there.
We're going to start talking about value stream mapping in a minute, which is a fascinating topic. We may get
for sure
on something like that. Keep going.
Yeah, and well, to go back to my roots as an accountant, I think people forget that finance is a human invention. It's designed to try and map out how you create value, and so that's really, you know, the foundations of my career and working in those software businesses. Really, what I identified is that I think technology first businesses, so particularly B2B SaaS businesses, but also businesses where software is at their heart, and marketplace businesses. There's a bunch of others. They seem to often reach a stage where the technology side of the business has less of a strategic voice or struggles for a strategic voice, which to me is very strange, because ultimately those businesses are trying to create value. They're trying to solve a problem and create value via technology. So technology really is the business. And having observed this,
you look around the boardroom and you don't see the CTO, you don't see the head of product, you don't see folks who are actually building the product of the company, which seems really odd, but you're right. I see that over and over again.
That's right. And I think that exactly that problem, whether it's, you know, physically being in the boardroom or not, those who are leading the building of technology, whether it's CTO, products, you know, whatever your roles and your organizational structure looks like, their ability to influence and drive strategy often deteriorates. Not always. I think some of the phenomenal success stories that you see are where actually they managed to maintain it. Often kind of stubborn, very technical founders might have been able to cling on to that in the face of some challenge. But I think that can deteriorate. And my hypothesis, or one hypothesis I think that contributes to this problem, is I actually think accountants and current finance methodologies have sort of failed engineers really to give them a language which they can speak easily in the boardroom to articulate the challenges that technology involves. So I won't sort of give you the whole picture, but when I compare the kind of conversations I've had with commercial leaders or sales leaders around hiring more salespeople or investing in marketing, let's say, those conversations have a financial language, unit economics and quotas and so on, that there is no comparison for in technology. You know, technologists are often, and I've spoken to a lot of CTOs in the past few months, they often almost feel like they're coming cap in hand to CFO, CEO, requesting budget for more engineers or more, or, you know, tooling or whatever else it might be, but without a clear language to be able to articulate why it's so important and why it's valuable. And that really is the problem that I am trying to solve.
Fantastic. Well, I can tell you two things about that. The first is that that's exactly what I coach people. And I was chatting to a CEO earlier today. I'm coaching some people in his team. And he said, my God, you know, these folks are just talking to me in a totally new way. They're using business language. We've agreed on some principles. We understand what we're trying to produce. They're debating with me and disagreeing with me in a productive way. You know, he was very, very pleased with the sort of cottage industry version of that I had for him. I didn't have something quantifiable, but what I had taught his folks to do was to have a conversation with him using analog methods, using sort of seat of the pants, looking at the situation kind of measurements. But those can actually be really successful. So they're able to cite, you know, if I do this thing, I will reduce this cost, and therefore will be this much more competitive against our competitors who have this different cost structure. And when they can put it that way, it makes it much easier to have the discussion. Guess what? You get invited to more boardroom discussions. So it's really, really valuable to be able to do. And what I think you're telling us is that you have something, you kind of got the tiger by the tail here, that there's something that we can do so that we can actually measure this more in direct financial terms rather than my sort of analog estimates and descriptions in qualitative terms. You can be more quantitative. Now, I want to warn people against something that often happens, which is somebody will come along and say, don't worry, you know, we don't need Pete's cool stuff that measures it in dollars and pounds and yen. All we need is the stuff we already have. We have velocity and function points and story points and all these other things. And those measure developer productivity just fine. Don't worry. Look, here's a graph. And you see the graph, and it's, you know, nicely going up. But the problem is, every time I've seen one of those graphs, I then go and talk to people who actually get value from the software, and they say, my God, I don't see that. You know, I see, at best I see flat. If not, I see down. And that's not making me very happy. That's not really working for me. And the most egregious, spectacular example of that is another community member who will remain nameless, but he knows who he is. And he started working with me. And he said, Squirrel, just take a look at this team. I don't understand what's happening. They keep showing me these cool charts, and they're showing me all the things they've got done. And they're really seeming to get, a significant amount of productivity. I haven't got the system I need. I needed it 6 months ago. It's really killing me. I went in and looked, and I found that he had multiple different organizations. It was kind of balkanized, all separated out into different groups. And every one was very productive. None of them worked together. You couldn't hook any of them together to make anything that would do anything for the customer. And I told him this on Friday, and he was very disappointed because he'd invested hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds in these people. And I came back on Monday, and it was the middle of the pandemic, so it wasn't physical, but essentially the development team office was empty. He had fired everybody except one guy. There was one guy in the back who was working on the old system. These guys were all replacing something. So he said, look, all of you aren't getting anything done. Squirrel's out of luck. Fine. That wasn't what I told him to do, by the way. I don't do that kind of consulting, but it was his choice. And he said, all of you are gone. The one guy in the back was actually producing regular value because he was working on a live system that someone could actually use and was implementing some of the things that my client needed. And we saw within a week that we turned up the support for that person. We got other people to come and help. We were immediately getting results and value. So that's the kind of thing you can get if you have incorrect metrics, ones that look great and give you nice, pretty graphs, but aren't tied to business value. So that's my cautionary tale. I have happier tales as well, and I bet Pete does. So Pete, can you tell us what do we call your thing, by the way? So what's it called? And suppose I went and bought it and I said, great, I now want to measure my engineers. How do I do it?
So the platform's called Duet. And you'll forgive the slight cliche here, but it's very much to do with allowing finance and tech to harmonize and actually work as a duet. So quite a simple, really, reason for that naming. So in terms of buying it, how do we measure engineers? Well, one thing that I am reluctant to do and would start with is actually measure engineers individually. I think that's very challenging and potentially dangerous. And so we have... the platform very much steers away from that. And actually one of the, and you kind of alluded to this, I think engineering productivity metrics are really interesting. I think there's some really interesting work going into that field. It's not the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think it's one component part. I think that if you, for example, reduce your technical debt by a significant amount or implement a new piece of quality tooling or something like that, that improves developer productivity.
Large language models to write your code, as a lot of people are more and more doing. Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those things may increase developer productivity. In terms of how that hits the P&L, to use my language, is a different question. So, and I think that's exactly what you're alluding to. So I think there is some, technical debt reduction or improvement in your processes, which either allows you to use fewer engineers or to allow those engineers to do more, which then it is financially measurable. But I'm much more interested in that financially measurable bit rather than understanding, are individuals doing more and more. Just to kind of explain a little bit about how, as you log on to our platform, how it works is we're basically connecting two pieces of data. The first is your GitHub data. So via API, you integrate with GitHub. And what that allows us to do is track what your engineering activity looks like inevitably, because that is the home of engineering.
Some listeners won't know what GitHub is. So let me just explain, because we have tech and non-tech people. GitHub is the place where your code lives. Now, there are different ones. GitHub isn't the only one. Pete started with the most popular one, which is called GitHub. And that's just a place where you can create new versions. You could imagine like you're writing a novel and you put in the first draft of chapter 7 and you put in the third draft of chapter 2, and then you update it with the next draft of chapter 7, except it's not chapters, it's code. So that's where your engineers are keeping track of what they're doing. And Pete is using that as an input. He says, okay, well, what are you actually doing? What are you actually writing? What words are you putting down on the page that cause the computer to do cool stuff? And you're tying that into something else. What's the something else?
And the something else is your financial data. So slightly depends on what you're willing to share, but ideally what we get is a financial model or some form of projections, which is really key because a lot of engineering strategy, particularly architectural strategy, relies on looking ahead. And then crucially, your engineering budget, because one of the main things we want to help CTOs be able to navigate better is where should I be allocating my resource? Do I really need more resource? And where am I going to see high ROI? So those are the two starting data points. I have a vision and would love to add lots of other different data on either side, but those are our starting points.
Fantastic. Now, at first blush, it would seem very difficult to connect those two things. By the way, I haven't reviewed any of this with Pete. I'm hearing it at the same time as you guys. So I would love comments and questions from any of you, and we'll get to some that you sent before as well. But Pete, when I look at this, I think, well, here's a whole bunch of code that I just wrote, or my AI just wrote for me, and I've committed it and I'm sending it out to the world so people can use a new screen. And then here's my financial projection, which says that we're going to sell another 500 seats or licenses or whatever it is that we sell. How do I connect those two things? Those seem unrelated to me. I mean, clearly they're related in that my new feature should drive more sales, but how do you see that from getting those two pieces of data?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that the future for a lot of this stuff, and there are some quite tractable, distinct types of engineering where it's easier. So let me give you an example. If you fix a bug and you have lots of support data from a support ticketing tool, you can quite easily identify how much each support query costs to serve. You then have a very, very easy way of, with high accuracy, measuring and forecasting. Actually, I don't think that's the most valuable problem to solve for most engineering leaders, because those are the obvious bits. The hard bit are the nuanced bits. And in practice, and this is where I think that accountants and finances has not helped, in practice, none of the models that are applied anyway are perfect. It's like any model. It's flawed, but it's there to help. So my aspiration with the first iteration is it needs to basically do two things. So the first is that engineering activity data in whatever chosen environment you choose to do it. For us, as I say, we're starting with GitHub. You have to standardize it in some way in order to be able to understand what you're doing. And quite a typical methodology for doing this, which some people in the squadron may have encountered, is to do some form of timesheeting. Now, the problem with timesheeting is no one likes doing it. It's time consuming, so it erodes productivity. And frankly, the data integrity and the quality tends to be quite poor. I won't elaborate on why, but most people have probably seen that. So our first stage is actually to categorize using an LLM. I think LLMs have a narrower set of use cases than much of the hype is describing. But actually, in this context, what it allows us to do is it gives an unbiased view on what that activity looks like. It's actually pretty good at understanding code being committed and broadly what that code is. And we try and give it, sufficient context to understand this is a feature development on this product, or this is refactoring this particular component, or this is optimization of, X, Y, Z. So it's reasonably good at that. And then the user can recategorize and adjust it, which also helps us to fine tune the model. But it allows you to, rather than do a load of timesheets, here you have a simple categorization of basically what's going on within your teams.
Fantastic. So what I'm still not quite clear on is how you take, whether it's timesheets or completed tasks, and tie those in a reliable way, even an approximate way, to business value, to increase sales or decrease costs or something else like that. Do you have to do a bunch of modeling for that, or are you asking the AI to do that for you? How does Duet do it?
No, this is the bit which I think is better off done in a deterministic way. I think in the long term, like the examples of support tickets, I think that there's statistical regression analysis and so on that could be done here. But I've started with what I believe are kind of three reasonably straightforward but valuable financial tricks, if you like, that are used in other departments but are not used to a huge degree in technology. That I think help solve problems that CTOs have talked to me about. So the first one that a lot of engineering teams I hear suffer from is this kind of understanding of how do we balance technical debt or infrastructure work against new features and building new products. Classic sort of strategic challenge. Well, the first thing, and I've asked for this before as a CFO, the first thing is, well, what does a typical benchmark look like? In loads of other departments, we will understand benchmarking for conversion rates and so on and so forth. But your average CTO, I believe, I'd be very happy to be challenged by the squadron if I'm incorrect on this one, doesn't have access to, okay, if I'm a startup that's looking to grow 3 times year on year for the next 4 years, how much tech debt should I be willing and how much infrastructure investment should I be making? That information is very valuable for me to actually determine my allocation of resource.
And the tech debt is hard to measure. And that could be another whole set. If you figure out a tool for measuring what tech debt is it 10% or 20%? Tell me, because I got a lot of people who'd like to know. I don't think it's that valuable a question directly. But that's an extra challenging one. But how much I'm investing, that I can know. I can go ask the CFO, say, how many checks did we write? How many contractors came in? What tools did I buy? So that's a number that I know. How are you going to tie that to business outcomes? I'm still a little fuzzy on that.
So the first thing on the business outcome side is, let's say I aspire to grow my revenue 3 times year on year. Chances are I'm going to have to do quite a lot of probably not just product development, I would say in genuine innovation. And I think engineers understand often the difference between those two things better than most. This is not, let's build a new feature for our existing customers. This is probably how we're deploying technology in a completely new way to solve a problem that they have that we haven't even touched yet. Because if I want to drive a revenue stream that 2x it. So the first thing in terms of driving business outcomes is, if you have benchmarks and thresholds for how much I need to be investing in innovation, it's very hard to do ROI on specific, research spikes or something like that, because it's low outcome, right? That's by nature.
Uncertain. You're rolling the dice. You could discover penicillin by accidentally leaving a Petri dish out, but you can't know that. You can't say my return was this because I got lucky this one time.
Absolutely. So the first thing is, I can get a sense for how much of my resource allocation should be being spent on this based on the financial projections of the company. Again, it's not perfect. It's not going to tell you deterministically, if you spend this, you're going to get that. That's not possible, but it helps direct and give you guardrails. It also helps you communicate guardrails to your teams. Similarly, though, you could also get benchmarks for, let's say your team, another classic thing I hear is getting increasingly frustrated with edge cases that we accept for enterprise clients and require us to do loads of support and maintenance as an engineering team. Classic problem, right? In practice, that's actually, from an accountant's perspective, reducing your gross margin, because every time you grow revenue in that way, you've got support engineering costs that's attached to it. And the percentage and the proportion of your engineering time that's able to be spent on genuine product development and innovation is getting eroded, because you've got to send your support engineers to do, X, Y, Z. So that is one area, is benchmarking. The second thing, and this is actually this is right playing into your father's background, Cyril, which is WIP. Everybody in software engineering understands the concept of WIP.
Work in progress for those.
Sorry, work in progress. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with that term, it's used throughout manufacturing, finance environments. It's used in almost any kind of construction or other output-focused environment. And yet in technology, let me give you another pain that I hear regularly from CTOs. We got 6 weeks through building this, and then suddenly a customer said, actually, I need this problem solved, and all of that got buried and we didn't do it. Or we
over on something new. Yep.
Exactly. The cost of that work in progress, at the moment, in finance, we just have a line in the P&L. It's just wages. Occasionally it's capitalized. I won't get into the nuances of that, but generally it's just wages. But actually seeing WIP is it's kind of the inverse of velocity. And I actually think it's in some ways more useful than velocity. Seeing how much WIP you have in most manufacturing environments is a really good sign of how effective you are. The WIP should be lower. And this is why it's somewhat like the inverse of velocity, because outputting small chunks reduces WIP. So WIP would be the second thing. And then finally, and I touched on it there a little bit, actually understanding cost allocation, because engineering time is not a single line that sits underneath gross profit. It's actually a bunch of different things at once that I don't know if it's because accountants just haven't got there yet, but we've not decided to prescribe elsewhere. And I think a combination of those things is going to allow CTOs to be, and their teams to be more strategic, more insightful. And none of it's going to be perfect, but it's going to give you, I believe, the opportunity to be 10, 20, 30% more effective with what is a huge capital investment for the business.
And that's what I'm always beating home to people who come and ask me about it. wait a minute, you're investing millions of pounds here. They'll argue with me about £20 subscription. And I'll say, the return on investment, even if it doesn't work very well, is tremendous. Why aren't you, just adopting these techniques? Okay, but tell me, Pete, well, how do you get the actual computation to happen? Is this something I see on a dashboard? Is there an algorithm for it? Is it something a human is scoring? It's not quite clear to me how you get from, I finished these 3 tickets and I know their allocation, I know the benchmarks that apply to them, and I got this outcome. How do I compute that?
Yeah, so operates slightly differently if we'll call it an engineering manager and a CTO. It obviously slightly depends how you structure your org, but we'll work with those two for ease. So if you're an engineering manager, you're going to see your activity log, which shows you basically your GitHub activity. And it's going to be categorized by the LLM, as I mentioned. And we actually go through a flow of prompts to also try and estimate how difficult that might have been. And so the effort level involved. But you can basically recategorize and overwrite everything to help us fine-tune the LLM, but also so that you remain in control. We're not telling you what you're doing. We're making our best guess and allowing you to kind of rewrite it.
But you're providing me a framework in which I can turn some dials and move some sliders. And the result is that maybe I allocate a bit more. My tech debt is more valuable to me because I have more compliance checks, and therefore I have to pass more stringent audits.
Yeah, you're
correctly.
You've pretty much got there. So the engineering manager will see their activity log, and they'll also see how much WIP is building up.
Great. And I'm going to go down a side road again, but how do you value that WIP? So I've got some work, and it's going to be valuable once I finally get it to some users, but it's stuck. I can't get a back-end engineer to work on it, or I don't have the right data in the data warehouse or something. That's work in progress. It's sitting around. It's valuable, but it's currently taking up space, and I'm not getting value from it. How do you value that?
Well, from an accounting perspective, it's basically exactly the same as you account for WIP in other areas. So if you know how much your engineering teams cost, and you know that they've been working on this thing, you can determine how much they have spent working on this thing. And if it isn't yet,
you can get to the value is harder.
The outcome, so the cost, yes. So we're assuming that at the moment the value of the WIP is exactly the same as the cost and the time that you've spent.
I see. But then over time we might learn differently.
Exactly. Now we can infer certain things, not at the moment, but certainly if you add a different data set, you might, let's say this is database optimization, or let's say we're optimizing some of our cloud infrastructure to try and reduce our cloud bills. We can make an assumption around how much that cloud cost is going to reduce. But again, this is where things aren't perfect, right? Engineering teams are going to do stuff, whether it's a research spike that doesn't turn into something, or trying to optimize some cloud work that actually, if you look at the cost and time they spent on it, isn't quite proportional. That's going to happen. But fundamentally, if you're at the point where somebody's turning around to you and saying, hey, that feature that's in 3 months on the roadmap, can we build it right now because we need to do it? And you're sitting on, let's say, £90,000 of software engineering time that's about to just be left. That's at least a data point that you can, use to punctuate the conversation, as opposed to just saying, yeah, but we've spent all this time on this.
Because you might want to leave it on the shelf and say, hang on a minute, we're 90% done, but we're not going to finish this bit because this other thing actually is more valuable. Have I understood correctly?
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's a challenge when it comes to new features and new products, where people don't like forecasting involving risk. So the reality of let's take the reducing your cloud bill is that, look, when an engineering manager comes to me saying I can reduce the cloud bill by this percentage, or by 20k per month if I do this, I'm probably not going to bank on a risk basis. I'm probably going to assume they're maybe going to achieve 15 to 18,000. However, if a salesperson comes to me and says I've got £1 million worth of deals in the pipeline if you build this feature, my risk adjustment on that is drastically more aggressive as a CFO. I'm expecting them to maybe deliver 50 to 100 grand if I'm lucky. So you have often some of these trade-offs lack a risk adjustment and a framework for thinking through that. And the problem for technologists is, and so many people will have experienced this, is you end up being a feature factory. the conversation around revenue always wins, and the balance gets lost.
And what you're trying to do is restore the balance by giving us some better weighting, some better metrics, some of which are just, what's the industry do? If you invest this much in a data engineer, you might get this much benefit. You seem to be investing nothing in data engineers. That seems dumb. Stop doing that. Have I understood correctly?
Yeah, and that in itself is a useful benchmark that I've very rarely had that kind of conversation when trying to say do the next year budget with a CTO or something like that. It's just to kind of go back to how
cottage industry, it's pre-industrialization that somebody says, well, I got this feeling that if I hire 3 more, I'll be doing well. The good analogy is to Moneyball, if you've seen the movie. Somebody discovered that if you actually calculated, you could figure out who the good baseball players are. Who knew? And so you don't have to say, well, I've been doing this 50 years. I think Pete's a good catcher. No, you actually go and measure and find out at least an indication of who might make the best team for you. Am I understanding right?
That's right. And I guess I'm the Jonah Hill character, I suppose, here, if you've seen the film version, because what I'm trying to do is kind of meet the two in the middle.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to kind of try and finish off how it would look if you jumped in. So if you're the engineering manager, you see that, and then you also see a couple of things. So one thing that the engineering managers get frustrated about, from the ones that I've spoken to, is one, they just kind of want some guardrails. Like if we're dealing with tech debt or we're not dealing with tech debt, give me a broad indication of how much of my time I can spend trying to address tech debt or infrastructure issues versus something else. But they also want context. And this is actually kind of in the root of what I believe, which is actually engineering teams really want businesses to succeed. They want to know that what they're building is valuable because they want to solve problems, and solving problems means being valuable. So they want context. So this also, you have a kind of area that gives you context. So some of those financial data points that relate to the product that you're working on or whatever. And then the final bit is basically helping the engineering manager determine how they can allocate the resource that's available to them. So I call it an allocation engine. And what that does is a few things. It, one, helps you understand how, if I move people around, what's that going to mean in terms of staying within those guardrails that have been set? So if I know that we're aspiring to get to 30 to 40% spent on products or product development, but at the moment it's only 20%, I can begin to at least move in that direction. But I can also understand
my clients would dream of 20%. They're at 2%. And so they desperately want to be actually investing in something that advances the business, but they're stuck in operational mires and difficult conversations with customers who are demanding and technical debt.
Yeah, and they probably, I might be being unfair on some of the CEOs and founders out there, but they've probably got a CEO or a founder who's largely just saying to them, why isn't this being released yet? Why isn't this being released yet? Which is the wrong question and actually exacerbates this problem. I won't go through the whole of the rest of the piece, but the CTO view is slightly different. It's much more.
Hang on. You just said something really valuable there. I just want to build on it. Because our listeners and viewers have heard me say it an awful lot. I'm glad somebody else is agreeing with me. You said that the question, when's this going to be released, is the wrong question. What's the right question?
Oh, that's a harder thing to answer. It's easier to say something's wrong than tell you what's right, isn't it? I think the right question, and this is, I guess, the conversation I want to help CTOs have is, how can, with the resources available to us, how can engineering, have the greatest outcome on business results, on the financial results?
What's the value we can create today, rather than we got this specific thing done, because there might be a different thing that's more valuable and we should do that.
Exactly. And just on this specific point about kind of managing to release dates, this is well understood in manufacturing, that if you optimize simply for, they call it OTIF, on time in full, there tends to be a trend towards creating excess capacity within your factory. So you're not using your assets at an optimal utilization level. Often sandbagging kind of delivery dates to customers to try and make sure that you've got enough time for anything to go wrong. And so, like with any measure, the law of unintended consequences can take over pretty quickly. But it does give people a sense of control. So it often does get defaulted towards.
You've reinvented something that I do a lot. I don't have the visual right here to hand, but I'll draw it with my hands. I have a thing called the tilted slider, and it matches exactly this the pattern you're describing. it's a slider that's tilted like this. It's a slider like you used to have on a radio. You're probably too young to have seen one of these, but you'd slide it back and forth, and you'd pick the channel. And I remember these. I was in my father's car, and I've tilted it. And the reason I've tilted it is that not only do you have productivity up here, which is totally non-OTIF, right? You're just trying to get whatever you can done at any point, but it's unpredictable. And at the other end, you've got predictability. And this is like what you might do if you were manufacturing, trying to produce to a very specific government contractor or something. NASA does this all the time. They have to launch at the right microsecond or the planetoid isn't there. So they need to be way down here on the slider. So it can slide up and down like this, but there's a force of gravity. And it tends to pull you down toward too much predictability. And that's the desire for control. The desire for control makes you slip down and go farther from the unpredictable but really productive and valuable work that might be higher value, give more gross margin, more profit, and toward things that at least make you feel better, but it doesn't actually help you. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing happens in manufacturing.
Yeah, I think it's very comparable. And as you say, there are examples and environments and customer types where it is right to optimize and give more weight to that particular KPI. And that's the same, I suspect, in software engineering.
Building a nuclear plant, you better get each piece done on time when their regulator shows up to check that the control rods are installed. Do that right. But most of us are not building nuclear plants.
Yeah, exactly. And so really, again, to kind of come back to the starting point, really what I want to do is evolve finance methodologies, evolve the way that engineering teams and CTOs are empowered to have the conversation of how they're creating value, because that's what finance is for. Finance is the language trying to articulate that value. And at the moment, it's not doing a very good job. No,
for sure. And you were about to tell us what the CTO sees. So you described the engineering manager seeing a certain level of information about sort of what value they're creating and where they are. What's the CTO see that's different in Duet?
Yeah, so the CTOs that I've spoken to have, I'm trying to solve sort of three core problems for them. The first is simply trying to report and articulate to boards or internal stakeholders, what's going on. So what they have is a series of dashboards and charts that show, based on the categorizations that we've created, what's going on and the cost of what's going on, because you can take that from the financial data that's been provided. So that immediately allows you to actually articulate, here's what's going on in my teams. And believe it or not, a lot of board level frustration here is simply, what product are they working on, or like what are they actually doing, is a thing that seems harder than I initially understood to answer. The second part is what is really around budget and resource allocation. So, but as you can imagine, when you go up a level, and it's not just within your team, this is about what teams might we need to hire, or where could we restructure teams and allocate resource between teams. I think that happens an awful lot. Often, week by week, you might be trying to move resource because it has specific skill sets, or free up a constraint within your system by moving people between those teams. So based on things like the WIP that you're seeing from the engineering manager having reviewed it, and based on the budgets that you've uploaded, again, there's a budget allocation engine that allows you to hypothesize. It's not going to be perfect, but if I was to move somebody over here, is it going to free up WIP? Is it going to help me spend more time on product development? Is it going to clear out this technical debt, so my technical debt constraints reduce in future months, and so on and so forth. And the final part is let
me just check on something with that. So I think that the overall sense I'm getting from you here is what we're not trying to do is be very accurate in our predictions. We know there's an error bar here somewhere that's saying, well, look, if I put this person on, they might not clear the work in progress because they might get ill, or the work in progress might actually not be their kind of work. So I can't do it scientifically and say for certain, if I put Pete on this and Squirrel on that, then I will get this much more benefit. But you can do a lot approximately, and an approximate answer at least gives you a guide. Hey, if I move Squirrel, I know I'm going to take him off the absolutely critical project, and no matter what I put him on, no matter how productive he is, he's still going to kill that project. I can't let that happen. Okay, can't move Squirrel. How about Pete? Have I understood the kind of thinking that you want the CTO to be doing?
That's exactly right. And I think that this is actually a really important point, because when we look at other departments, so the commercial departments like sales and marketing are the easiest ones to talk about in this respect. It's exactly the same. There will be ROI for marketing channels. There will be unit economics about lifetime value of a customer over the cost of customer acquisition. It is all of those things have a whole series of assumptions and will not be true week on week on week. And actually, most engineers I find struggle a little bit more with that concept. I actually
We have
started
exact answers. We talk
exactly.
to computers because they give us zeros and ones and right and wrong answers, and you want to give us these approximate answers. Go away. We don't like you.
Yeah,
I
exactly
like
right. But you have to be comfortable with that uncertainty in order to be a strategic leader and have that voice. And you've got to articulate that uncertainty. It goes back a little bit to our conversation around risk. That you've got to be comfortable and you've got to resist the CEO or the founder who, why has this product not delivered revenue? Well, if we want to grow revenue 3 times, we've got to be doing an awful lot of innovation that isn't going to work, with the hope that something does land. So we need to be able to have that conversation effectively, years in advance, really, ideally. And the third element to this is a little bit playing to that. So there's a series of insights. One of them is an adjusted P&L that takes the traditional accounting P&L and ascribes via mapping that we've built bespoke. How does your P&L really look based on what your engineering team are working on? If you're spending half your time on maintenance and support, your gross margin is not what you think it is. And there's a series of other insights around benchmarking in this area and the initial, I'd love to develop this over the long term, but some initial views on ROI, because lots of CTOs are asked, what are the ROI on your teams? You cannot answer that perfectly. You never will be able to, but you can make an informed view now. And as we add in more data in the future, I think we can get, particularly in certain areas, really, really accurate.
And in the same way, our friends in customer service or sales might measure their ROI. Look, you might have a customer service person who clears twice as many tickets as anyone else, and 3 useless ones who never get anything done and just annoy customers. You're always going to have the outliers, but an average customer service person will clear this many tickets. That will give this much value to our customers. They pay us this much for the enhanced service that they're providing, and therefore we can sell this many more platinum level sales. Yeah, and that kind of logic our customer service friends are used to talking about. This is how they say, let's get a new call center. But us engineers, we love precision so much that we say, that's not mathematically sound. So just give me more. I promise it'll work. And that doesn't actually cut much ice.
I think that the worst thing, if I might, because I'm a huge advocate for engineers, hopefully that's clear, software engineers in particular. But one of the worst things that you can have a tendency to do is trip yourself up. And the reason I use this example is I think support tickets are such a good kind of analogous example, is you don't tend to speak to support people and have that kind of conversation that you've just alluded to and hear, well, hold on, customer support agent A has only dealt with 3 tickets, but they were really hard tickets, whereas customer agent B has dealt with 50, but they were really easy. I don't get bogged down in that argument. And from a software engineering perspective, I get that different bits of work are harder, and some engineers, that is not a problem that I'm trying to solve. That's what the engineering managers and yourself as leaders can form a judgment on and manage. But we do have to use the aggregate data to begin to inform us of direction of travel and business impact. So let's not get lost in the minutiae, essentially.
And here's a danger. Here's a challenge for you. It strikes me that somebody could misuse this, and in particular, there might be somebody in the executive boardroom who's an opponent and says, "Oh yeah, I want the budget from the IT department. I don't want those techies to get this. I want to put it here. I think we'll make more money from it." And that person says, "Okay, CTO, you told me that if we invested this much, that we'd have that P&L result. You showed me the numbers, and look, we invested this much, and it didn't happen." Now there may be all kinds of reasons for that. But I wonder if you make this, currently it's quite qualitative. So the CTO will say, look, if I have 3 more people, I know I can get significant progress on this roadmap. We know the roadmap's valuable. Give me the 3 people. If we make it quantitative, we're going to make $47.2 million from this new team that we're going to hire. and the cost will be 5 million, and so therefore we have this profit. If you get specific like that, you might get burnt. I think some of our listeners might be saying, I'm going to get in trouble here. Somebody's going to kill me because I didn't quite hit the number. And you're saying, Pete, that you should give caveats for it. I agree completely, because all of this is as inaccurate as sales projections or customer service return on investment or anything else. But how do you avoid that, especially when people kind of expect us engineers to give right answers?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. I think one, as you've alluded to, the platform is kind of directional by design, as opposed to here's a cut and dry forecast. I do think, and I think it's an interesting area to explore potentially in the future, there are some areas where you might have a very high confidence interval of, say, fixing X bug is going to result in Y cost reduction in support. And I'd love that, as we can have more data and do the statistical analysis that shows that, I'd love to go in that direction. But for now, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's actually the problem that most CTOs struggle with. So really, this is about creating directional insights as opposed to really clear-cut forecasts. However, I do think that, CTOs will need to lean into, okay, we're expecting X amount of revenue from new products and innovation, but that has to come with here's the kind of resource that, based on benchmarking and based on whatever else, we would be expected to be able to deliver.
And here are the risks that might cause us not to actually get that benefit.
Exactly.
It's the same as if you send a container ship from China over to the US and it's full of all kinds of amazing new goods that you're going to sell. And there's a typhoon in the Philippines, and suddenly, or somebody decides to close the Strait of Hormuz or something, suddenly it can't get there.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So you're taking a risk there. You know how much stuff you had on it. You know what the prices are. You can say with pretty good certainty, when we get it here, we can sell it for this much more. But getting it here actually has a risk. So you have the same kind of delivery risk, value risk, all kinds of different risks that you need to emphasize. Okay, very helpful.
Absolutely.
Let me turn to a few questions that have come in. Is that okay, Pete, if I try to get those in?
Can I just add one last thing to the
you
point
go ahead,
you just made? There's another big thing for me here is that, in terms of that board, as you say, there might be somebody in the boardroom who's trying to use this against you, right? Duet cannot prevent bad actors, but what I do believe it can do is empower CTOs to be able to spend more of their time working those relationships, because good C-suites or board level members should try and understand what's going on in engineering and listen to you and talk to you. This is the bit where I think, as you say, you help CTOs, but also it's really hard in my experience to go into any board meeting or any executive conversation if you're on the back foot trying to pull together data. So when people are asking you, what's the ROI in this? Or, what's your team doing? And you spent the last week and a half just trying to put it together. That's a really hard position to be in, not having a consistent rhythm and ability to see that live and learn from it.
You probably don't believe in the numbers either, because you hacked them together at midnight in some Excel spreadsheet based on timesheets that you don't believe. So
exactly.
I have a lot of CTOs who
exactly.
tell them not to do that anymore.
Absolutely. So I truly believe, by creating some sort of a framework, which is the kind of mission that I'm on here, actually will empower CTOs to be at least well equipped for those conversations, because there are going to be bad actors. There are bad actors in any environment. We can't solve that problem.
And I'm not even thinking of somebody who's maybe super political and trying to get you fired. I mean, just somebody who says, well, look, we keep wasting all this money on engineering. I'm going to now use these numbers to verify whether we're wasting it. Look at that. We're wasting it because we expected X and we got Y. And the same argument would go for, importing the container ship from China. It doesn't mean that the Strait of Hormuz will be closed all the time. It means that when you get there, it will have value, but it might be delayed by forces outside your control, or forces you could have anticipated but couldn't mitigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's turn to a couple questions from folks who are watching and who came along before. Here's a really interesting one from Michelle. I'm just going to read it out. And Pete, let's see if we can understand it and help her together. Trying to understand valuing the work of development in terms of retention revenue versus growth revenue. In other words, if you're struggling with growth and new features aren't converting into growth, do you recalibrate your dev team to keep the lights on until you have a new strategic plan? So what Michelle is distinguishing there is what about keeping current customers and growing into new ones? do you have benchmarks and metrics for that? Is that a future thing? Do you think that's not important? What do you think about that, Pete?
I think it's super important, and I think that this where to start. So this is where really good financial planning and strategic insight into the technology can harmonize really well. Because the example that Michelle gave, where you're trying to keep the lights on, becomes a perfect example of where actually understanding risk and understanding the likelihood of revenue conversion, say from product development, comes really key. So one of the really key aspects of building for existing customers is that the risk level of that converting into revenue is likely to be a lot higher, or your certainty is likely to be a lot higher. If you have 20% of your customer base telling you they want this feature, I can guarantee you that is going to be a more higher certainty of converting into revenue than a load of conversations you've had with customers in the pipeline who've not yet signed. So, and the reason I say this as well is I think that I often hear from product leaders in particular about this concept of a portfolio of bets, but we don't really, that portfolio never has, there's no odds, if you like. It's like we're betting at the poker table without ever seeing the cards. We don't know what the likelihood of, turning on the river is. So I think that to answer Michelle's question, absolutely got to understand those in detail, and actually understanding why those different revenue streams are different and how you can then allocate resource in your engineering team towards those things is really crucial, because you might be able to achieve 30 to 50% revenue growth year on year by building really good stuff for your existing customer base that are screaming for it. Are you going to be able to grow 3x, 4x? Well, unless your customers have really big wallets and this problem is a lot bigger, you're going to struggle. So you probably need to have a portfolio where you're building for that growth revenue. So yeah, this is such a good example in my mind of how we can help each other.
And I agree. Michelle, I don't think we have a specific answer. You should put 24.276% into keeping the lights on. But what I think Pete is giving you, and certainly I'm agreeing strongly, is that valuing the work of the development team, as you put it, in these categories is very helpful. And what Pete's offering us is at least a window into a way to get more numeric about that, using, this is what I hadn't understood before we did this. That's why I love learning like this, using benchmarks and estimates and best practices, which he's going to figure out over time. And so his product will only get better as he gets more and more data that help us understand, well, look, most folks who invested only 25% in their current customers in your industry had poor outcomes. And they had poor outcomes because those customers really demanded things and they churned. And the new folks, as you say, Pete, were less certain. If we had that kind of metric, and I don't want to promise on your behalf, Pete, I don't think you can go and buy your product and suddenly have that on your desktop tomorrow. But I think you're saying you're headed that direction. Have I understood right?
Yeah, and what you can absolutely do now, and I think struggles to happen in a lot of businesses is, if Michelle's finance team and commercial teams are forecasting that, okay, we know that things are tough, and we need to get 30% revenue from our existing customer base and peel back on a load of our new revenue streams that we've been hoping to grow into until I don't know, burn is reduced. Actually, each of those factors should be reflected in your financial model, which is why ideally we have a financial model uploaded. And you can then begin to work back to say, okay, what are the implications for how I allocate my tech resource, or what other resource? How should I restructure my tech team in order to get there? And then you can start being strategic. That is absolutely possible now. And you can start tracking, your activity following a restructure, for example, to see whether, you are focusing in the right areas.
So my financial advisor, for example, will say, well, what if we went more into equity? So zip, does a Monte Carlo simulation, fancy stuff, and says, okay, well, that doesn't get you to your retirement plan. Okay, let's not do that. How about if we went more into bonds? And so this kind of what if thinking, I think, gives Michelle some insight. So Michelle may want to look into that, and we'll certainly make sure everybody knows how to get in touch with Pete. Pete, I want to try to get one more question in. We might run over slightly. How are you for time?
That's absolutely fine.
Fantastic. So this one more question is a fascinating one from Jez, who I've worked with for probably better part of 15 years now. And Jez, nice to see you here and see your question. Jez asks, how do you reason about the profitability of work like platform engineering? which is 1 degree removed from direct customer value. So if people don't know what platform engineering is, it's something Jez is very good at, I happen to know. It's making sure your servers work, figuring out how to get onto Amazon Web Services so that your software can actually run, getting partners to provide you market data or information that you need. All of that kind of stuff that doesn't provide a direct result for a customer, but it gives all the engineers all the stuff that they need in order to add a new report, add a new screen, build a new algorithm or feature. So, Pete, how does your model account for that, or does it?
I think this is a great question. I think that I may be failing to understand perfectly platform engineering, but let me attempt to talk about what we can do now and what I think we can do in the future. So I think this is hardest where this whole concept of connecting tech activity business outcomes is hardest where it is nuanced like this. It's not a new feature that a customer is going to spend money on. It's not directly reducing a cost like a cloud invoice. It's degrees removed.
Yeah, I'm making the software more scalable so that when we get a big rush in 6 months at Christmas, we'll be able to handle the Black Friday demands on our website. But I'm not going to see that result until Black Friday. What I'm doing right now is just investing so that I can scale up and deal with the results of a TV ad or whatever it is that marketing thinks up.
Absolutely. So the first current use case that I have that I think it relates to this, but I may be misunderstanding, is that if you can understand the revenue trajectory over the next 2-3 years, say, and particularly any, let me give you some examples of specific like infrastructure related challenges that might emerge. One is, okay, we intend to grow geographically. We intend to go into a new geography, or another might be that we need to fundamentally ingest a different type of data to be able to create this product. Then, whilst you might not have a direct link to the customer, what you do have is an ability to articulate, based on your financial plan, here are a series of things that need to be true in order for us to deliver that, and therefore require platform engineering or infrastructure investment. I'm not sure if that's a correct understanding of
no, I think you've got it. You've got it exactly. And sticking with my Black Friday example, it might be we're going to sell a new product, and we need to market the heck out of it. And the time when people are going to buy it is Christmas, because that's what we're selling, is a Christmas themed product. And therefore, we need to prepare now in order to be ready for that. And we know what the outcome of that is in our financial model, because we've invested in the new product, we've built the new product in order that we can sell it then. But wait, we got to check that we can actually handle the load when lots of people tell all their friends and try to buy it. So then we can link Jez's work, amazing work, high skill and high praise for Jez, because he did it for me in exactly this kind of situation. He turned up at a company where I was CTO at the time, and really got our servers in order and ready for, in fact, Black Friday, because we did a lot of retail selling. So that's a concrete example that I hope is helpful to Jez and to others who might be thinking, how do I tie this work to customer value? And you know what? Go ahead.
Sorry, just to add to that. So I think the other thing that you tend to hear about examples like this is, okay, what you don't want is engineers to be building something that's infinitely scalable or can scale to billions, when actually, so partly is getting the financial insight to say, what is the window? In my opinion, the long-term future on this, and this is, particularly for things like SaaS products and so on, it would be to be able to start taking things like observability data. There's loads of amazing observability tools out there, understand platform stability, and begin to statistically understand the relationship between that and just customer churn or revenue retention and so on, which will give you more depth to this problem. I can't promise that yet, but it's definitely the direction I want to go in.
Fantastic. And please keep us posted on where you do get to. Let me tell listeners and viewers just a very brief story, because I told you a horrific story before. By the way, that story ended really well. That particular community member, their business is thriving, and they're doing a great job with the old system, not with the new one that was built with these inappropriate metrics. But I worked with a client who they really do really important work for society. And they're also community members. So if they're here, hi to you folks, you know who you are. But they really help with some really nasty things that human beings have to do, and they take those away so the computers can do them. So saving people a lot of very painful work. And they had a problem with actually getting a massive project done by a deadline. So kind of like we were talking about before. So, if you just drive it only to the deadline, then you wind up sandbagging a lot. You wind up wasting a lot of value just trying to make sure you hit the deadline when you don't have to. And they shifted to a couple of techniques that I won't go into here, but that match up very closely with what Pete is talking about, the glide path planning method and elephant carpaccio, and basically got to the point where they were able to measure what value they were delivering every single day. And they talked about, my glide path analogy is you're landing an airplane, you're keeping it on the right path to land. They said, we've put in a few parachutes and we're going to check at this height and that height, do we parachute out and go somewhere else? So I really thought they helped with the analogy. They hit their target. They were very successful with this method of delivery. And it was all tied to a measurement of business value. Now, in our case, we didn't have Pete's fancy financial models and benchmarks and things. So we were doing it much more ad hoc and with finger in the air estimates. Pete's offering us a way to get a little more scientific, but not too scientific, which I think is really valuable. So wanted to tell that positive story so you don't think there's only bad practice in the world. There's lots of good practice. And Pete has some tools here, which I think are really promising, which we'll want to follow. Pete, how do people find out about Duet? How do they find you? I know you're looking for some help with this. So tell us a bit about how people can find out more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very much still in the discovery phase, but we're about to launch our beta version, and really what we're aiming to do is get a handful of design partners who feel this problem really acutely, and who want to work with us to make sure that the solution that we're offering them is going to help solve that problem. So the best way really is to reach out to me.
For early customers, it sounds like.
Exactly that, early customers
willing to put up with something kind of broken, but gets a lot of value from it. Okay, keep going.
Absolutely, and can really help shape build it. We believe that you probably need of the order of kind of 10 to 20 plus engineers in your team, and you probably need at least $1 million to 2 million of annual revenue to be really starting to make kind of trade-offs where this becomes worthwhile. But we're looking for and frankly, the larger your teams get and the more, different customers and different demands that you have, the bigger this problem gets. So we're looking for people to join that. The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, and reach out to me. We've not yet gone public with a website. As I say, we're still in the beta stage. And really, I mentioned to Squirrel before we came on, I'm bootstrapping the business to start with, certainly. So, we've not been doing flashy press releases or anything yet, but really keen to just work with a handful of people who really understand this problem and feel this problem deeply to try and solve that problem before we kind of try and expand.
Excellent. Now I'm putting up a LinkedIn link for everybody. But if you just look for Pete Donell, 1 N, 2 L's, I bet you have to tell everybody that, Pete.
That's the one. I can also share.
That, you'll find the right one. You can also just ask on the forum or ask me, because I'm always happy to help people get in touch with Pete if you have any trouble. But I've just commented, and I think Laura will help us make sure this goes on the different platforms and so on. So you know where to go look for Pete. If you'd be interested in working with him on this, because I know he's got some very interesting ideas here. I really want to hear where they go. Pete, would you mind just keeping us post on the forum every once in a while? Say, here's where I got to. This is the latest challenge. I think listeners and viewers would really like to hear more about where you're going. I certainly would.
Yeah, absolutely. I've already been keeping my eye on the forum and trying to gather as much as I can, because ultimately I need to learn a lot from engineers. So very keen to.
Fantastic and very helpful. Pete, wonderful to have you on the live stream. Hope to have you back again when you have some more progress to report and more exciting stuff happening. Already very interesting and exciting. I've learned a lot today. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
I'll see you on future events in the next few weeks. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Cheers.
everybody.